Hi, I'm the educational consultant with Advanced Nurses at ACD for N, and today I have Mona Maya. She is an adjunct professor at the University of Penn. She's a lecturer in Chichua, and we are going to actually be having a really interesting conversation. We're going to be talking about reality testing. We both know as professionals that we often have to navigate spaces where sometimes, especially as we climb higher or go further in our careers, we don't always have people who look like us, right? And so sometimes with that, you may not necessarily always have the resources or have the outlets or have those coworkers that you can really be honest and raw with about things that you're feeling. So whether that is maybe that imposter syndrome creeping up, or maybe concerns around an incident that occurred. Maybe there was a joke that was a little off color. Maybe there was a comment that was made, and you don't know if it was someone just being, you know, a bad joke teller or if they were actually trying to say something to offend you. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter what the reason may be. If you don't understand why something was said and you were left feeling uncomfortable, if you don't have the space to reality test, oftentimes it can make you feel like you're going crazy. And so, to prevent that from turning into something that impacts your decision making and could possibly take you down a pathway of self doubt, maybe even depression or just trauma, or take you down a path of weeks of just ruminating about things or experiences that left you feeling uncomfortable. It is so much better when you have that reality, that person to reality test with. So I just want to first thank you for your time. This is your area because you're an expert in mental health and how one should address these type of issues when they show up at work or when they show up at home in or in personal relationships. So could you just, like, first of all, kind of give me some uh background in how these kind of issues show up in the workplace?
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Um, as Black women, especially in a professional space, um, especially in healthcare, working as a nurse, um, you know, I want to reassure people that when you see something, don't think that you're overreacting. Don't think that you're imagining, because most of the times, what your gut is telling you is the truth. Um, I have come across nurses who have walked into a patient's room and have been told, go get the nurse, because they think that you're the CNA, right? In a hospital. I've had nurses in corporate spaces where they're trying to give feedback uh, to an idea, and they are dismissed. And mainly the first reason is these people are people of color, And I always say to you that unless we are accountable and we address these things, things will not change. And we have a responsibility to advocate for ourselves and speak up when we feel like these things are happening. Um, the story that I think you had mentioned a little bit briefly that you want to talk about, and I just want you to give a little background um, of an encounter you had, and then you mentioned it to me, and I was like, yeah, let's hit this, let's talk about it. So if you can just talk a little bit about the story, and then I'll add on other how to deal with this kind of situation specifically. Thank you for having me.
Well, awesome, thank you. So essentially what was happening is this was a client of mine, a new client. She was referred to me, and essentially what she said happened, and the person referred her to me essentially said happened is that she had interviewed for a role. And this was a role that was like specifically in CDI. So this was going to be a new opportunity for her. She's certified. She was feeling really confident and energized around the opportunity to break into this space. Um, I've said it in previous uh, interviews, especially with the coding nurse. He talks about this often as well. That CDI often, and like a lot of areas in nursing, is heavily gatekept. And to a certain degree, you kind of feel like you have to be in a club, as the way she actually described during her session with me. And so, without getting too personal, essentially what was happening is she had interviewed for a position. She was in a panel interview. She said she felt during the interview that she wasn't going to be selected because she could actually pick up that the questions were not necessarily focused on them getting to know her. They were just kind of like short, fast, hard questions. And even at some point in time, there was a question that was asking her about like her ability to kind of handle doing presentations. And she's like, that's not really an area that I've, have a lot of experience in, but it's something I can develop. And she felt like every single question she was answering was just being like evaluated to like the highest level. Like there really wasn't an opportunity to show her potential. And so, therefore, when she was not selected, she wasn't particularly surprised. But then she was also kind of questioning, like, wow, like this is the third or fourth interview, opportunity I've interviewed for, after getting my certification. Will I ever be able to enter into this industry? And again, the person who referred her to me essentially said, I have someone you should talk to. Um, Specifically because I think that what you're experiencing, whether it's the self doubt or whether it's the experience you felt like you had during that interview where you felt like no one, from what you see, no one on that panel looked like you, it could really be related to, you know, your race. And so, with that being said, her being able to reality test with someone led her to me. And so a lot of the work that we're going to be doing is really going to be about building up her confidence
Mhm.
to, speak to what it is that she knows and feel comfortable speaking to what she knows. And again, I didn't ask her to, test out like her own insecurities or to prove to me that she didn't say anything that made it worse for her or contributed to the outcome of not being selected. I didn't ask her to do any of those things. I just listened to her. I validated her feelings at that time, right? At the time she shared with me during our first consultation. And then also gave her some homework assignments essentially so we can work on building up that inner confidence, and so that can shine out, and also so that we can practice some of those presentation skills that she's saying she doesn't feel like she had. So I just think for me, she was able to get to reality test with the person who referred her to me and
Mhm.
she was able to reality test with me, which to me, I feel like if I did not offer her that, and if we did not approach it that way, she probably would have been questioning if she should even continue, like if she should even pursue, you know, her journey in going into advancing into this specialty area in nursing.
So I'm glad I've heard a few things which are very important, and I'm glad that she reached out to you by verbalizing and sharing the burden of what she experienced. Most staff, when you're going to an interview, you can read the room. And I have been teaching for 13 years, right? I present all the time to my students on Zoom, whether or in classroom. That's a skill that takes time to build. It's not something that you can say, oh, and even now with all my experience, it's very hard for me sometimes to still present, especially if it's a new audience. So I'm glad that she reached out and shared the burden, verbalizing the experience with a trusted peer, someone like you, instead of internalizing and carrying the emotional weight by herself. Um, Most of the time, especially us Black professionals, we are interviewing with people who do not look like us. So already you have anxiety, right? Performance anxiety. And you're looking at these people and they're coming at you with questions not to help you validate your experience, but almost to undermine you and tell you you're not qualified to be here, you know? And I always find this very amusing, especially in healthcare spaces, because I find that people of color, we have tons of certifications just to get where we need. Meanwhile, we will be supervised or be managed by someone who doesn't have the same experience, doesn't have the same background, but, and I'm sorry to admit this, color plays a very big part because it's about who they know. Most of us, it's about how hard we work, and we've earned the right to be in this space. So don't ever let anyone invalidate your experience. Um, Friends are important because if you are experiencing things like microaggression, right, or racial profiling, it's good to go to your friends and ask them for feedback. And recently, someone shared to me how they're also interviewed, and it was also in a healthcare space, and they knew that they were just being interviewed. They would not get the job because none of the people looked like them either. And yet this person is not a nurse. It's important for you to gauge your emotional response. It's okay for you to say, I'm upset. I don't know how to handle this. Um, how do I, who do I reach out to help me deal with the emotions of rejection? Because let's be honest, nobody wants to deal with rejection. And rejection is even a double whammy when you know you're qualified, or most of the times I always say overqualified. And people are treating you like you're an entry level employee, yet they have seen your resume, they have seen your credentials, and they still want you to prove a point. And it has happened to me too. I've gone on interviews. I remember someone asked me, oh, send us your program management experience. And I was like, what? Immediately I knew that this might not be the space for me, because if I've told you something, why do I have to prove, with things that I have to email you or send you? Nah, that to me tells me this is all we're talking about, microaggression, and it's not right. Another thing I would say always is, find a sounding board, go to someone. In her case, she did the right thing by coming to you and saying, hey, this is what happened to me. Am I an imposter? Because you were able to tell her, no, you're not an imposter, right? You know the pattern, and I'm sure you have experienced this, right? Have you not, in your professional career?
I have definitely experienced this in my professional career. Um, I mean, for me personally, I've had I have had my own work related trauma that I am working through. With, first of all, telling myself that the experiences that I was having were specifically me. I just thought it was just something about how I was showing up. So, um, early in my nursing career, I just, it's a part of that youthfulness. You wear your little fancy clothes, you got your hair done up, makeup, and all that kind of stuff. And I was probably like 3 or 4 years into my nursing career, and I just had, like, a ball of confidence, ready to rock and roll in my role. And then I had this manager who I just remember her wanting to I felt like almost like keep me in my place. So even if
Poke your balloon, right?
right, because I felt like and it's crazy because the thing that was interesting that stood out to me is she had a niece that she was really close with that was having a lot of trouble. Like, she had, like, drug addiction. The niece had a drug addiction issue. The niece's boyfriend had, recently, decided to take his own life. It was like a really horrible experience that she would always share, with the rest of the team. Of course, as the manager, she would meet with us frequently and had these little conversations. And it's somewhere in the back of my mind, I would always think that maybe some of the issue that she was having with me is that she kind of wished her niece was more like me, in the sense where, like, man, I wish my niece wasn't, caught up with the whole, substance abuse issue and all that kind of stuff, and, the whole thing with the boyfriend. I wish that that wasn't her profile. And maybe she was more like I mean, again, it was very hard for me to read this because all of these things I'm telling myself are reasons why this lady is treating me this way. And I found myself, yes, I was early in my career, and I did find myself crying in her office, you know, expecting her to care, right? I remember even going to HR, kind of just telling HR, kind of like, I'm confused about these feelings. And again, expecting them to care. And these were not people who looked like me. But again, this is how naive I was to assume that going to them with these feelings would be something that they would like they would immediately resonate with and say, oh, well, well, this is the kind of thing that happens when you're a young woman. Like, thinking I'm going to get some kind of pep talk like that. And so in many cases, it was kind of like, girl, everybody worried about them tears. Because it was like the abuse and what I felt was abuse and the targeting and the microaggressions, it wasn't going to stop. So quite frankly, I felt like I was kind of putting myself out there to people who were just going to use that against me. Because of that experience, I have developed a certain hypervigilance around work situations. So typically, when I start seeing the writing on the wall, I'm already checking for the exit. I'm already trying to check for the door.
You
I'm
call it
looking at, is a window cracked? Is it a door somewhere? I'm already in on the LinkedIn, the job aids and everything, and I'm already out the door because I did not develop, which I have now. I'm doing better now, but I did not develop the tools to withstand those kind of triggers. So I had found myself in a cycle of reporting to someone who doesn't look like me, who I'm, more educated, or maybe I have more degrees, maybe I have more certifications, or maybe I'm just good at my role, no matter what the structure is of that person, that the back educational background of that person. But they just, again, like you said, want to just take the wind out my sail or take the air out my balloon to deflate me a little bit. And again, I always thought that that was something that I was doing to make that happen. So I learned to, unfortunately, until more recently, to navigate those situations by making myself small. And so working remote was like a dream from heaven,
right.
because during the pandemic, it was like, and I told my sisters this. I said, I'm so happy because I knew that with the pandemic opening up those doors, I'm like, those doors are probably never going to close. Because remember the pandemic, we never knew when that was going to wrap up. So for
Right.
me, I was just too excited about that opportunity. So I remember um, the Washington Post, and a journalist from the Washington Post had actually interviewed me during the pandemic, and she asked me, like, quite, frankly, what is your experience, working remotely? And I said, I love the fact that I don't have to navigate what I'm doing with my hair. I don't have to navigate what my outfit, or, anything about me. It doesn't matter. I could produce good work, and that's the only thing that it matters. So with that, I wanted to seal my career with a kiss by getting certifications that would validate, right, and take roles that would typecast me as an ideal candidate to work remotely, because I was like, this is going to be the safest space for me to be, so I can avoid the triggers.
Right. So it sounds to me like you have PTSD, and that is completely what happens most of the time when you've been hurt, right? It's fight or flight. And in this case, it sounds like you took the option of, okay, I'll flight and I'll work in a remote workspace where I don't have to deal with these things anymore. But these things can also be found in a remote workspace, because it just depends who is your manager, who is managing you, right? And preserving your mental health is always a very important first step in defending your well being, especially your mental health, right? Because if you're going to a place and immediately you sense that I have to constantly prove myself, for me, I think the best thing to walk away from that job. Um, as I had mentioned that I had interviewed somewhere and they asked me a question of, oh, what kind of program managing? Can you send us examples? Immediately, I knew that it wasn't going to work out, because why do I have, I'm a Black woman in my late 40s. I don't have to prove anything to you, and you have to validate your emotional responses. If you're feeling hurt, it's okay to sit quietly and ask yourself, why am I hurt? This is your body's reaction to what it's saying, and what your body and your perception of your workplace. Most of the time, these things are true. So you need to be able to sit down and say, hey, um, what kind of patterns am I identifying here? In your situation, in your example, you saw that there was envy and some jealousy, because there she was looking at you, you have all your stuff together, and she's wishing her niece could be this person. So of course she's going to pick on you, of course she's going to uh, work on your feelings, because you thought that by being empathetic and kind, you were you're going to gain mutual admiration, but you were not. In return, you were getting resentfulness, like, oh, how can this woman be so well put together, and yet my niece has all these resources and she's not making use of them. So what happens is, like I think we had spoken earlier, like microaggression, things will start getting weird. And I'm sure there were things you were saying to yourself, maybe I'm imagining this because this woman has just confided in me about her niece, her family issues. We have a connection. And yet I feel like she's treating me that way. Did you ever find yourself having those thoughts?
You hit the nail on the head. It was literally that experience that helped me to understand. And I not to go on a tangent, because I do. But this reminded me of another time when later on in my career, maybe about 5 or 6 years after that incident happened, I was working alongside someone who, it was a Black woman. We worked in an adjacent department. Our departments worked really close together, and she confided in me that she was dealing with some anxiety issues. And one of the things I had said to her, I said, do not expect to share those issues that you're having with anxiety with our manager and assume that she's going to sympathize with you. And I don't think she quite understood where I was coming from with this advice. And during her one to one, she would share this. And she told me, like, oh, I told her this and I told her that. And I'm like, just understand that she could easily use that against you, especially if you're saying that outside of your lunch break, you may need time to walk. Outside of your lunch break, you may need time to meditate. All of these things could at any point in time go from these understandable work life balance strategies and then flip and turn around to something else.
Most of the time it does. I've experienced that. I've experienced a place where I thought I was safe. It was a social service agency where I articulated very well why I needed certain accommodations because of my mental health. And actually, the same thing was used against me. So it's very hard to read. It doesn't matter where you're working, it's very hard to read how people will respond. So this is why it's important to connect to your community outside the workplace, because looking for some of this support, it might not be helpful, and it could eventually even make you doubt yourself and give up your passion that you love so much. And it sounds like this particular individual you're talking about really wanted to be practicing in this space,
But
So,
I wanted to also add, if you don't mind, the manager that she was having, that she shared this situation with about her feelings, her anxieties, would told her, I also have those issues. And that's why it's important for me to get up and go out for a walk. And I walk my dog and I walk to go get my mail. And she's telling all these different places, things that she does to help balance her anxiety. So you could imagine the two of them probably felt like, or she probably felt that she actually connected with her. Oh, you have that? Me too. I need to take walks. And everything was fine until it wasn't fine. And so the moment that this woman now, this black woman, who was always doing really good work, wanted to set a boundary around something, she was being asked to do, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you're taking too long in your lunch break. I messaged you and, after you were done your lunch break and you didn't respond back to me until 30 minutes later. Or, at the end of the day, at 3 o'clock, I asked you to do something and you didn't do it. And it was all of this nitpicking around time, because we're a completely remote team. So really, it's not like she was going to her cubicle and couldn't find her. You asked a question. It's not like we were saving lives. We're not doing CPR. There's no crash cart. There's no, ICU. We're not running anything like that. So there's nothing you're asking someone to do that really can't wait for the next day.
that
But
is an
she purposely would put things on the end of this on the, at this late the end of the day, and then say things like, I need it to be done by the end of the day. But it's like, okay, it's 3 o'clock, so it's already
that's
the end of the day. But those are the kind of things that start happening until eventually they managed her out of her role, which I felt sorry for her, because I know that for her, that working was what maintained her medication and is what maintained her therapy. So once she lost the job, she was going to be, have that long gap of time without having that, the psychotherapy she needed and also her medications.
so
Ladies, I'm sorry, I have a quick question for Monda. What would you suggest for people to do that don't necessarily have like a large support system to get um that support or that feedback or that conversation going, if they maybe are an introvert or they don't necessarily, like I said, have close friends, maybe they, you know what I mean?
so I would suggest get professional opinion, you know? Try to see a therapist, because therapy is a safe space, right?
Yes.
And and yes, not everybody is an extrovert. I am an extrovert. I share all my things with everybody. I will say things, but most of the time, what I have learned, and this doesn't matter whether we are working under a black boss or whether we are working under a white boss, a toxic workplace is a toxic workplace. If you're sitting somewhere and someone is asking to micromanage your time, the most important thing is, what were the tasks that were meant for, that you knew in advance days before, that were meant to be done by the end of business day? That's the most important. If you're finding yourself in a workplace where something is sprung on you at 3 p.m. and they're telling you by the end of business day, that's 2 hours away, right? You should have this completed. That's not a safe workplace. Get out. Get out. You don't need to be in a place like that where they are looking to find ways to fire you, because it's unrealistic. Especially, I found this. People don't know this, but I have been working remotely, and so have you. I know, for many years. And we tend to overwork because we sort of feel guilty for being in our own homes. So we tend to get more things done than if we would have been in an office space. Because when you're in an office space, you have water cooler moments, right? You go talk to your friend. That's sometimes the conversation can take 20 minutes and nobody's watching to see if you're green, if you're orange, if you're yellow. You get my drift, right? But working from home, you find managers, especially those people who are micromanagers, toxic bosses, are asking you, oh, you are away. What happened to you? You could have had an emergency, right? And I too suffer from anxiety. I need mini walks throughout the day in order to function. I need to step away from my desk, take a walk, and come back. But at the end of the day, whatever tasks were meant for that day, I'm always sure that they have been taken care of. So the fact that this woman was actively triggering her on purpose, and what she should have done in the prior persons we're talking about, your colleague, is she should have been documenting these incidences and perhaps spoken to HR, and said, hey, I noticed that once I shared my condition or diagnosis with my supervisor, things started changing, because unfortunately, that is workplace bullying. It is bullying. We can't sugarcoat it. That is bullying. And if she didn't have people in her circle, if she's an introvert or she doesn't have people at home, most of us are single Black women, because that's another topic. But yeah, so if you're sitting there, if I had been her, I would have gone to HR immediately and said, hey, you know what? I noticed that when I had this conversation with my boss, instead of sympathy, I'm getting these things,
Well, can I add something here?
Sure.
Now, the funny thing about it is, I was trying to reality test with her.
Yes.
I actually was experiencing some things where I was trying to kind of gauge from her if I this Black supervisor who was working alongside me, this woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I said to her, I said, yeah, is it just me? But does it feel like this question was asked because of this? And, could you also kind of fill me in if she's, telling you something that's a little different than what she's telling me, and kind of just want us to be at odds? Because some folks will do that. And like you said, working remote doesn't actually make these kind of things go away. People it's just another method for that kind of thing to continue. And I was trying to reality test with her, and she was the one saying to me, oh, I don't think it's like that. I think, she actually deep down is a good person. I think you shouldn't, dwell on the negativity. And so it was being packaged as kind of like I was a complainer. And again, I'm like you, I'm an extrovert. I'm an extroverted person. So for me, it's like, if I'm saying something like that, I have no problem saying like, hey, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm not so heady that I can't take that. Like, hey, you're looking at that wrong. And so when she did that, I was like, okay, cool. So eventually I had picked up my purse and had to go because of the fact that it was they started to do weird things to me. Like it was like a out of the blue type of situation, completely out of the blue request that made absolutely no sense or whatever. Needless to say, I was handsomely taken care of when I departed because of the fact that it was definitely an issue that it was found that I was being targeted. However, when I left, I said to her, in my absence, from what you see, they're probably not going to be replacing anybody in my role, quickly. So I said, they're probably going to start trying to offshoot some of those responsibilities to you. So I
Right.
said to her, in preparation for that, and before you go, you need to start making a little library of those incidences that you're having. For whatever reason, maybe because of that first time I tried to come to her, she just brushed it off.
Mm.
Well, she wound up getting written up for not coming back from lunch soon enough. Um, add up and like let's just say it happened like this: end of September, and then mid October. Mid October is when she actually contacted me. This is after I'd have left the job. She then called me. Oh, you wouldn't believe what's happened to me, and she started running everything down to me. And she said, yeah. And this is the second time she wrote me up. She said, well, the first one was of course a verbal. The second one was in writing, and the second one she was told, if you do this again, it could be grounds for termination. And she said to me, I can't believe she's being so harsh with me when I told her what I've been going through. She knows I've been dealing with something personally with my family. I can't believe that she's treating me like this. And all I could think about is all of those times in the past when I was telling her that she needed to stop sharing those intimate, you know what I mean? I was telling her
Yes, unprofessional sharing, unprofessional.
yeah, yeah, granted your supervisor is there, the person you report to is telling you about walks her mailbox and walking her dog and all these things that she has to do during work hours to keep herself regulated, and you're like, yeah, me too, and you're sharing all of this with this person who, you know after your one-on-one, she goes back to acting like, a witch on a broomstick. But you thought that during your one-on-ones, when you guys are touching base and you're talking about all this personal stuff, that this was like some intimate, like isolated, safe space. And I'm like, I don't think so. And so again, by the time I, moved on to another opportunity, and she's there pretty much bracing herself for being terminated, I said, before you go, it's probably going to be in your best interest to start gathering,
Evidence.
some, or I would like to call it data, right? Get your data together. Even that appeared to be too much of an ask. So
Right.
when she finally departed from the role, from what she shared to me, she tried to apply for unemployment. Well, when she tried to apply for unemployment, essentially what happened is they said, we have it reported that you were let go from your job because of misconduct. And if
Wow.
you ever left go because of misconduct, you are not eligible for unemployment.
Wow.
And that was a case in her state. I don't know if that has changed, but in her state, that was the case. That
And
was the
that is
And
a
she had
bad
nothing
situation.
documented.
That is a
She had nothing
I'm,
documented that she
I,
was dealing with all of these aggressions and all this
wow.
stuff. Yep. So that was that. She went on months. When I say months, I mean months without receiving any kind of unemployment benefits.
That's a very sad situation. But I would also like to go back and congratulate you for getting paid handsomely, as you put it, from when you decided, I'm not going to put up with this, and you left. Um, Hopefully, this young lady learned a lesson, because most of the time, I don't know what it is, as people of color, we second guess ourselves. We have our own biases. We are so used to being ill-treated that we kind of co-sign some of this behavior, because when she had shared with you, you had articulated to her the steps to take to make sure that she took care of herself, right? I call that a parachute, okay? Because the parachute, if you need it, you can present it in court, right? A conversation, you cannot take it to anyone and say, oh, but so and so, I spoke to this coworker and I told her what I was feeling. Those are not things you can take back to unemployment. But if she had documented this and said, hey, HR, I noticed that this is happening. I noticed that this is happening. Even though, because HR is really, most of the time, they're not on your side, right? They're there to protect the company. At least what would have mattered is she had a documentation of what was occurring. Now it was going to be Howard against them, right? But not having it documented in any part of the interaction makes it, if I don't see it, actually we do this in medicine. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen, right? And basically that's what unemployment taught her. Like, oh, you claim you were going through all these things.
And to your point, it was clear to me that one of the reasons why she wasn't documenting what happened was because she was telling herself that it could go away if she didn't focus on it. So for her, keeping a scorecard almost felt like she was depositing into this negative thought bucket. And I could only imagine what was going through her head as somebody who's going through therapy, someone who prior to even taking on this really demanding role probably already had her own issues that she was trying to navigate. And so that's one of the reasons why you have to be so clear about your boundaries, because in situations where you're already taxed coming into a role, and then you're in the role and you're saying like let me kind of like finally take my coat off, so to speak, let me kind of finally take this heavy bag off of my shoulder, and you're trying to get comfortable in your role, but then you're met with someone who is saying like, yeah, I'm so sorry, I can't make that accommodation for you. I'm so sorry, you're after your lunch break, you need to immediately be available, and you can't be, you can't not be available. And it's like, okay, we have messages that we can send, direct messages. You can ping the entire team if you want to. You can send emails. At the time, she even had a mobile phone. And so all these different ways that this manager can get in contact with her. And the first thing this manager is thinking is, let me get you out of that role, or let me punish you for needing more time. So again, it's one of those type of things where the incidences where maybe she had some leverage or some type of advantage because it was early on, there was no documented, you didn't return from your lunch break, because once that documentation starts piling up on you, then things have already taken a left turn, because now it is, they are documenting, and they are documenting things that they can prove you didn't do, and they can say that company conduct, they can come up with all kind of reasons why those things are evidence that you're no longer useful, right? But what she should have done is, before things took a left turn, she actually should have been just taking a registry. And I know that is hard for people to accept, you know.
Yes, it is hard for people to accept, because you almost feel like, oh, am I setting up my manager?
And that's why I call it data.
Yes, yes.
Because guess what?
Yes.
You never know never know you need data until you need it, right? Isn't that how data works?
Yes, yes. In any program intervention, what is the first rule they ask us in public health is, oh, where is the data? Let's look at it, right? Yeah. So no, you're not setting up, but you want to make sure that you have no bias and your feelings are accurate. I think sometimes too, it helps when you document, because you can go back and read it for your own self and digest it. Like, okay, this is what happened. Let me write it down and read it to myself and see how it sounds. And you'll be amazed at how your own perception will change once you document something. And you feel like, oh no, I didn't imagine this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing we spend 40 plus hours at our workplace, okay?
Right.
We spend a lot of time there.
Mm-hmm.
Your manager has more effect and affect on your life than your therapist. Because you can even have a therapist, right? But if you're a therapist, you feel safe, you can say whatever you want. But every time, if you're getting up at 3 a.m. and thinking, oh my gosh, tomorrow is Monday, I wonder what stunt this woman will pull tomorrow. Even if you were King Kong, I'm sorry to use an analogy, you know, because I always think King Kong is like a beast, right? You're bound to have self-doubt. You're bound to go in thinking, oh, you know what? I might not be good enough for this role because she's always finding something to pick.
Exactly.
So you're now actually falling into the trap that they have set, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I usually find that most corporations are actually better than other spaces, but it still happens. You still have that one bad egg, you know, who comes in and thinks, oh, this person doesn't belong here. So therefore, I'm going, like you use the right word, manage you out, you know?
Yep.
And she managed them out because not only did she harass and create a toxic workspace, but she said it was misconduct, making sure that the company does not take responsibility. What she was doing basically is covering for herself, you know?
Yep.
So, because if they have to pay unemployment, if they have to keep paying unemployment, of course, companies are like, wait a minute, people under you keep leaving us or citing you as a toxic boss. What's going on? So this woman is really the greatest narcissistic boss she ever had because she made sure that she cut all ties and she cut all venues for her to find an escape because she was like, oh no, you're not going to get your unemployment either because I'm going to cite you for misconduct.
Because you have to remember, with me, it was a double whammy.
Yes.
I was paid handsomely and still was eligible for unemployment.
I love your stories like that. And I love where you make them pay because anytime when there's workplace toxicity and workplace bullying, the only way these companies are going to be accountable and change their behaviors is they have to feel it in their pocket. They have to feel it, and it can't be some miserable amount like, oh, here's 40,000 or no. You need to go after them for the maximum amount so that they should never do it again. And unfortunately, it sounds like your friend had a very good case, except she didn't have the right strategy. And strategizing in this kind of situations, knowing when to document, having a second opinion, going to and even sometimes go to your coworkers and say, hey, have you experienced this? You might be shocked. They might be like, oh yeah, she did this to this, she did this to somebody, and she did this to that person. That's all you need. You start your little diary and you keep track of all these things so that if it gets to a place where you can't stay in the place anymore, or they are proactive and they fire you, you can go back and say, hey, this is what I experienced. Because one thing about mental health, and I'll always say this, nothing, no job, no relationship. And when I say relationship, I'm not just meaning intimate partner. I'm talking about family relationship. I'm talking about siblings is worth your mental health.
Nothing.
It just takes a moment, and next thing you hear, oh, that person died by suicide because they were experiencing such and such, and this is what happened. And in her case, this is a very clear example. She needed to have insurance to keep going to therapy, which means she had to stop her therapy, right? Because
and right. And then also to add, she felt so like, I just remember clearly that when she had contacted me, which I'm sure took a lot for her to contact me, because remember, if I'm trying to reality test with you and you're denying it, and then you finally have your moments, and again, this would be moments with an S, because mind you, she didn't contact me until after the second write-up.
right.
So at that point in time, she's already kind of behind the 8 ball, so to speak, because now, even if you try to articulate like historically that there was an issue, it would appear as though you're only saying that now because you're trying to defend, so I remember her clearly saying to me, I can't believe that she is putting, my job at risk, over, I think in one case it was 30 minutes after her lunch break. And I think another time it was after her lunch break. She had returned to work and she had returned and everything, but there was a ping or a message that was sent and she didn't respond to that until 40 minutes later. And that was the second one that got her into that, if this happens again, we're going to have to let you go kind of thing. But I remember her saying, I can't believe she's treating me like this when she knows that I need, the medication, the therapy, and what's going on with me personally. And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking that's exactly why she's doing it. Like, you gave her everything that she needs to take you up out of that role. So the first moment you say, no, I can't, mentally, I'm not here, I need a personal day. Listen, with people like that, if you're going to take off of work, and this is just a word of advice for anybody who's listening, please do not tell them why you're taking the day off of work.
No,
don't even mention it.
No, it's your time.
It's your time. You don't have to mention any of that. You telling her I needed to take a personal day and I need a week off. So again, in their mind, you shared this with your manager. So in their mind, they're like, well, when is the next time she gonna need a week off, personal week off? Or wow, so her work is not getting done right now because of some personal, a personal day, a mental health day. I'm like, boy, again, and the poison pill was that damn one-to-one time where she's sitting there, where this lady is telling her about all the things that she needs to do to manage her anxiety. And then she's coming back, responding to this manager, telling her all the things she needs to do with her. And you think that you have this connection that you're making. And again, all it was just data she was collecting. So what happened is she wasn't coming in there with her pencil and paper, but the manager was.
And the manager, the first time she wrote her up, the writing was on the wall. If that situation, I would have been actively looking outside for another position because she was never going to salvage this relationship.
No.
She had all the power, and what she needed to have done is start documenting whatever it was that was occurring from the first write-up and continue to look for work or ask to change managers. Most times some places will let you do that depending on what kind of a job it is. They'll let you switch supervisors. If you say, hey, I'm having difficulty, it seems like we don't understand each other. In fact, when I was interviewing for a job, I was also interviewing the manager to see what kind of a person the manager is, because I have now learned that jobs are a two-way situation. When you're interviewing for a position, you should also be specific and say, hey, what kind of a manager are you? And most people who are narcissistic, micromanagers, start showing you little by little. They'll switch interviews and say, oh, hey, can we meet you on such and such a day, when they had already asked you for a specific time. To me, those are red flags. You should start asking yourself, do I really belong in this space? Do I want to be on this person's team? Because as you mentioned, if you need to take a day off, you don't have to give the why. This is your personal time, okay? If you want to take a day off and sit on your couch to regroup, it's okay to be not okay. You don't have to tell your manager, oh, today I'm not coming to work because I'm not, mentally, I'm not there. Most of the time, and this is where this individual went wrong, she was giving ammunition, okay? She was giving war tanks, okay? She was like kamikaze, okay? I can't, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. It's like a billboard.
Yes,
get rid of me and get somebody new in this position.
You know what? Yeah, this is not a little small handgun. We're talking AR-15. So, sorry to use that
Exactly.
analogy, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I just want someone to get a visual because,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big no-no. You don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to explain. If you have been at a
No.
company, even if you've been at a company, if you feel that your mental health is not doing well and you need time for yourself, that's okay.
Exactly.
Recently, I had to take some time off at my workplace. You know why I knew that maybe this is the right space for me? My supervisor actually said, "Oh, if Monday is going to be away for a week or two, at least we have these things in place and we can always." And I was like, "Oh, this woman is great," because I couldn't believe that was coming out of her mouth. I was like, "What?" I am
Mm-hmm.
a workaholic. I would never take 2 weeks off, like unless I have to go to
No.
Africa or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I use my work to cope. So, with my anxiety. So I
Mm-hmm.
just listening to this story, I feel bad. And this is why I love having these chats with you so that we can open it up for people in our own spaces and in our own environment that, okay, being Black in corporate America, there's ways to navigate this because I think it's very hard for us because we don't really talk about these things and we think, oh, maybe I'm overreacting. There's a narrative of the angry Black woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people will push your buttons and where instead of you speaking up, you're like, oh my God, they're going to label me. They're going to say I'm overreactive. They're going to say I'm an angry Black woman. But you know what? Whatever feeling you're having is valid. Don't let anyone mute you. Don't let anyone make you have self doubt. Don't let anyone gaslight you, and make you think, oh, how come you're always taking time off? Is it your mental health? Or those are things you shouldn't even answer. You shouldn't even respond. So document, document, document. Talk to your therapist. Talk to your colleagues. Talk to a trusted family member and make sure that when these interactions happen, that whatever you think is your feeling, that it is valid. It's not in your head. You're not overreacting. You matter. You're somebody who is bringing professionalism. You're bringing your credentials. You're bringing your education. Be proud of who you are and go out there and slay. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we wrap up today, I just want to highlight for anyone who is going through, any kind of work related stress. This platform targets nurses, and specifically, well, in general, individuals working in healthcare, but specifically nurses, right? I just want everyone to understand it is very possible. It is possible for you to navigate these negative experiences. I am not big on telling people to get up and leave a job where they can work through these issues because, as the saying goes, no matter where you are, there you are, right? So if you get up and you leave and you go to another job, or you get up, you leave that relationship, you go to another relationship, or you avoid this person or that person, you walk around with the trauma because your body will keep the score. Your thoughts about a situation is how your body is going to take it in. So if your thoughts about a situation is negative, your body is going to register it as negative, and your mind is going to keep the record of it as a negative thought, and your body is going to register. So whether that's your cortisol going up, blood pressure going up, you feel that you're more on edge than usual, or you're awakened easily up at night. When you wake up in the morning, you don't feel rested. It's hard for you to go to sleep because of the ruminating thoughts. None of these things are things that we want to have going on for a very long time. They actually, you know, dysregulate your body systems. And so, therefore, it is not just as simple as the mental health piece, but it is a holistic, mind, body, and soul. So, for me, I think that the word that I really want to leave, and, again, I just went on another tangent, but the word that I really wanted to leave is, feel comfortable finding that space. If you need to, reach out to me. I'm very big on, I offer free 15-minute consultations. So if it's just 15 minutes to just brainstorm and, come up with an exercise or exercises that help you to kind of pick your head up and change the thought pattern. And when I say change the thought pattern, this has nothing to do with dismissing the experience. It's about putting a spin or reframing the situation. And as I'm saying this, I'm also registering that for myself, reframing the situation so that whatever the silver lining is of that situation, that is how you are registering it. That is how you are storing it in your mind and in your body. For example, it doesn't matter how bad the situation is. You could literally be in, I don't know, God forbid, but you're running late for work, or you're working remotely and something happens to your Wi-Fi and you just have a crazy morning where you can't connect the Wi-Fi, you can't start your job, you can't even get to send an email. And I've had this experience before where you can't even get to the email to say something that's happening because it's something going on with your Wi-Fi, right? Whatever the circumstances. Once you get reconnected, now you're able to resume your duties. If you register your memory of that event and you hook it onto how the story ended, as far as, I was so glad IT was able to get me through there, then your body is going to register the experience and your mind is going to recall or record that experience because of how the end point of that story that you package and restored for yourself. So if you're thinking about that same example I gave there, and you say, well, I can't believe I had a crazy morning. I just can't believe I had a crazy morning. And you're stuck at the crazy morning and not when it was resolved, then that's what you're going to keep thinking about, how crazy your morning was. You won't even think about the fact that it was resolved. You won't even think about how smooth IT was with it. You're not even going to think about how smooth your internet provider was if you had to, contact help desk or something like that. You won't even think about that. You'll be so stuck at the discomfort and the inconvenience if that's the part of the story that you want to stick on, if that's the peak of the story, if that's the area of the story that you want to recall, if you want to change the way you're thinking about things. And this is an exercise where I'm telling you, I'm articulating it this way in bits and pieces. This is something I'm working on. So I don't even have all my words together. The next time we talk about this, I'm gonna have all my words together. But that's how you want to start doing things. Whatever the good part of that story is, however it resolved, however it ended, whatever was you were able to move off from it, remember that part of it. Because then you will start building up your data on positive experiences. Because if you build your data up on negative experiences, trust me, those would be the first thoughts that come to your mind when something just like that happens again. And you'll find yourself going down a pathway. I'm speaking about this as a person who's experienced this herself. You will go back and you will start keeping account. You will start tallying negative experiences. And by the time you know it, the only thing you can think about is how bad things consistently are for you, because you're keeping a register of negative experiences. So if you keep a registry of positive outcomes, right? Silver lining, whatever that is, it will allow you to tap into that. So when you think about this event or something triggers you, even when something comes back to your memory about the situation, whatever it was, you will think back to that positive outcome because that's how you stored it. We want to hear from you. Schedule a free consultation or send us an email at advancednurses@acd4n.com or visit our websites www.advancednurses.info or www.acd4n.com.